Why is it that the United States, despite being the world's largest oil producer, cannot fully use its own oil? It's similar to a person growing wheat on their own land, but still having to ask others for help to use it. In the world we live in, what is visible is often the opposite of reality. Similarly, every year, millions of containers go from China to the US. But why are they discarded as waste there? And amidst all this, how and why does Iran smuggle Boeing 777s? Welcome back to Unseen Truths TV videos. Did you know that at any given time, around 300,000 ships are at sea? These include oil tankers, LPG and LNG carriers, tugboats, passenger ships, and the container ships that power the global economy. About 90% of global trade happens via sea routes. Estimates suggest that every minute, 6,000 to 8,000 container ships are traveling across the oceans. With the help of automatic identification systems, these ships can now be tracked in real time. If you visit websites like Marine Traffic or Vessel Finder, you'll see the oceans lit up with tiny lights. Each light represents a massive ship carrying millions of dollars worth of goods. Most of these container ships originate from China and travel all the way to Europe and the US. Surprisingly, each ship carries an average of 5,000 containers, meaning around 40 million containers are constantly moving across the seas. Everything from our clothes to mobile phones reaches us through these containers. At first glance, it seems normal. Goods come in, empty containers go back. The reality is far more shocking and concerning. The balance of global trade is heavily skewed. China exports so much that a flood of loaded containers leaves its ports. In 2023 alone, China had a trade surplus of over $823 billion. It exported $3,380 billion worth of goods, but imported only $2,557 billion, leaving the surplus at $823 billion. The problem starts when these containers reach the US or Europe. China's surplus is $823 billion, while the entire European continent combined has just $41 billion, 95% less than China. When these containers arrive in the US, the situation worsens. The US is the world's largest consumer, meaning the import-export balance is disrupted. The US imports much more than it exports. As a result, only 40% of containers leaving US ports are sent back filled. So, where do the remaining 60% go? You might think the rest return empty, but they don't. These containers sit abandoned in junkyards across America. Shipping an empty container back to China costs around $3,000, and it occupies valuable space on ships that could carry fully loaded containers with millions of dollars in goods. China doesn't need these $3,000 used containers, as it can produce a new one for around $2,000. Every year, 2.5 million new containers are made, and old containers are plentiful. So what happens to empty containers stuck in the US and Europe? Many are sold cheaply for storage or construction. They are now used to build homes and offices, and when nothing else is possible, they are melted down for steel. Each container has roughly 2 tons of steel. Next time you pass a port stacked with steel containers, remember, it's not just waste, but a story of a broken global economy. Now back to the puzzling question. Why can't the US, despite being the largest oil producer, fully use its own oil? On the global map, the US leads oil production, ahead of Saudi Arabia and Russia. Yet, surprisingly, the US is also the second largest oil importer. It sells its oil and buys from others for domestic use. There are 3 main reasons behind this. The first is the chemistry of oil. Not all oil is the same. The US produces light crude oil, which is low in viscosity. However, US refineries were designed for heavy crude oil imported from Mexico and Venezuela. To process its own light oil, the US would need to upgrade its refineries, costing over $200 billion. Instead, it sells light oil globally at higher prices and imports cheaper heavy crude oil. The second reason is logistics. Oil production is far from refineries. For example, Texas has vast oil reserves, but there are no pipelines to deliver oil to New York or the East Coast. California faces a similar problem. It has become an oil island and must import 70% of its oil. The final nail in the coffin is the Jones Act. During World War I, the US faced a challenge transporting soldiers and goods overseas. They relied on foreign ships, but realized in case of conflict with allies, they wouldn't have enough American crude ships. The Jones Act mandates that goods shipped between US ports must be transported on American-built American crude ships. Since building ships in the US is 3 times more expensive than in China, and crew salaries are higher, transporting oil from Texas to New York is very costly, adding roughly $5 per barrel. American refineries find it cheaper to import oil than use domestic supplies. These are the strange reasons why the US, despite being the largest oil producer, depends on foreign sources. Switching to Iran, the US has imposed sanctions for years, preventing Iran from buying or selling to America or its allies. Yet, Iran's airline, Mahan Air, operates a large fleet of American and European aircraft. How did Iran smuggle Boeing 777s? In 2024 or 2025, Iran surprised the world with 5 suddenly appearing Boeing 777s. The process involved years of planning. In Australia's Alice Springs Desert, a graveyard of old planes caught Iran's attention. 5 usable Boeing 777s of Singapore Airlines were there. Iran couldn't buy them directly, so they used an American company company, Iron Aviation, to acquire them. They were then shipped to China and sold to a fake Madagascar company, Udon Aviation, existing only on paper to evade US detection. Once registered under Madagascar's flag, they were outside the US FAA's control. These planes were flown to Cambodia, where aviation rules are lax, and from there they filed a flight plan to Kenya under the guise of maintenance. Once in Afghanistan airspace, where Taliban monitoring is weak, they turned off transponders and diverted to Iranian cities, Chabahar, Zahedan, and Mashhad. By the time the world noticed, the 5 Boeing 777s had become part of Iran's fleet. The US cannot act because the buying and selling companies were registered under fake names. Today, Mahan Air has 50 to 60 active aircraft, mostly Airbus, with 7 Boeings. These planes use other countries' airspace, yet America cannot interfere due to the Chicago Convention, which allows civilian aircraft to use foreign airspace unless there is war. However, sanctions limit refueling access in many countries. Unseen Truths TV hopes you like and share this video. Thank you for your love and comments. See you in the next exciting video.